Well, I want to start by saying that I share everybody's feelings about the experience here today. I think it was a very good experience, a lot of really rich debates, and I think we're onto something globally, and you can tell from the vibe. I mean, I personally enjoyed it a lot. So the title of today's last plenary is Organize, Resist and Transform. And I'm going to try and speak about Egypt and reflect on I live also in London, and so it's always for me trying to draw parallels between movements here and there, and what we can learn from each other. I'm going to try and speak about structural violence, really, and how we fight this with alternatives and possibilities we create with our movement. Now, why do I use the word structural violence? Because I think it is so underused, and especially in a context like Egypt, where people focus on the violence, but forget that at the core of this, there is really the structural inequalities that we're fighting. I want to start by sharing maybe something very recent. It's an experience that has moved me a lot and reminded me what are the values that we're fighting for. So something that maybe is not Tahrir, at least for now. And it happened in last December, after the massacre that took place by the end of November by the military that's been ruling Egypt ever since Mubarak left. And when they killed 52 people who were peaceful protesters, just in Tahrir, and they used force against them and injured 1,000 people. Anyway, so I was collecting then testimonies. I was in Cairo. I was collecting testimonies from the hospital of those who were injured to prove that they were, injured by the army. And I was collecting a testimony from a young man who was shot in the neck by the army. And he was crying because he had also lost people in the ambulance. And next to him sat a man in this public hospital who every time this young man cried, he laughed. He laughed incessantly. And it was a bit crazy, it was a bit like a surrealist movie. And he kept saying, ha ha ha, yeah, this is Tahrir, you the revolutionaries. And it was a bit weird, and we got into an argument at the end, and I was like, oh, this could have been your son. On the side of the story, long story, we'll come to an end. And then on the side, before I left, his brother pulled me and said, can I have a word with you? He said, I'm sorry for my brother's behavior. He's been terminally ill, he's been diagnosed with cancer, and in this public hospital, waiting to get an operation for the past month and a half. And every time he gets in, either the doctor is not there or the emergency room is not there. And on the day, the people from Tahrir who were shot in Tahrir came in. He was finally promised that he was going to have his operation. And he was in the emergency room, and then they pulled him all out, and they said the hospital is working 10 days on emergencies. And so they created a sense of frustration and hatred towards those revolutionaries. And I bring this because I think the violence this man has been subjected to is not less than the violence, or maybe is equal to the violence that the other patient who was sitting next to him was subjected to being killed or injured by the army. And it is this structure of violence that continues in our societies today, and are continued unseen, unheard, and are the ones that then end up putting people like English Defense League, like all the racist organizations, because people, or BNP, because people don't know where to express that structural violence. And I think what we're doing here is today, by fighting these structural violence by alternative movements and alternative institutions, and creating possibilities that will live through not just insurrections and not just big revolutions, because you don't want big revolutions to happen and not have the organizations and the institutions that will provide an alternative way of being, right? And an alternative way of associating ourselves with the world. And so, what am I trying to say here? How are we building these institutions? And how, for example, in the case of Egypt, this happened or didn't happen? Well, a week ago, I was asked, and I was in a conference speaking to young activists in Ireland, and I was, what is very challenging to somebody from Egypt today is to try to speak about Egypt as an inspiring experience, when actually the vibe that's coming out of there is very depressing. And so you want to be honest to the experience of the people. You don't want to come and say, hey, Tahrir was great, you know, we lived it, and today we know that the military is still killing, that the neoliberal regime is still there, the economy hasn't changed. But in fact, this makes me, and makes, I think, my comrades also reflect on what is it that we have gained, you know, after a year of fighting where we were with a parliament. And after a year of fighting where, although we lost around 1,000 people, you know, not a single military officer was charged. The laws against, I mean, the massacres, in fact, were committed even more. The neoliberal structures are exactly the same there. Even the old figures are still there. But I think we have gained a lot. And what we have gained are the institutions that we have built and the spaces we have owned inside this system. And it is something that when you do, you don't realize. And I think people speaking from Chile said this, you know, that we were working on things, opening up spaces, without necessarily understanding that the work we're doing here today was opening spaces. So I always like to go back to the 24th of January, which is the night before the revolution. And I've been more or less involved in the fight for the past 5 years before things happened. And yet, that night, I was having a conversation with my good friend, and I was arguing over something very personal, being very fussy. And he's like, Dina, do you think this is the right time? Tomorrow's the revolution. And I'm like, tomorrow is the revolution. Yeah. and never imagined this would have happened, you know. Although really we've been on the streets every day. And part of it, because I wasn't realizing, and I think many of us, what was it that we were doing the years before, and how we were opening up spaces in the system for us all to come together, in fact. And this is the essence of the relation between the work we do and things like the movement or occupations or uncut movement, or today 99%. It is establishing spaces that will then lead to something. So, in fact, I could have never imagined it, because up until 2005, we never could say Mubarak on the street. And this is not some kind of, you know, story exotic. This is real. I remember that in 2005, when a movement called Enough Movement just came up with the idea of starting protests to say that we don't want the son of Mubarak, Gamal Mubarak, to inherit the country, basically not to come to rule since he was being ruled. And I remember we were 500 people standing in the square, or actually the square came later. You would stand by the journalists in the street wasn't even ours, you know. And we would stand there, and people would pass by and look at you and be like, who are these? They're not in touch with the reality. The same things, right? Same things that people say about Occupy movement. They don't have jobs, we fight for it. And then you never thought what you were doing meant anything. It was just a protest. It was a way to just fight the nothingness of this regime. You know, you can't just live in that system. And slowly we're opening up spaces, in fact. And by we, I mean Egypt, and not necessarily, you know, activists, but people in different places. The workers who were striking from 2006 to 2010, who for the first time ever got Mubarak's photo and stepped on it in 2008 in Mahalla. We thought it was big, but we were like, we were defeated. You know, the general strike failed. And of course, we weren't aware that it was another big win. Another small union established there, independent union. Bloggers moving around a video of a man being tortured in prison. And it was the first time we had evidence that there was police torture. And there were small movements, small things. And then suddenly, of course, I mean, suddenly and not suddenly. In a sense, revolutions are the best thing about them is that they surprise us, and at the same time they're kind of predictable. So they are very interesting, and it is based on these openings in the system that this revolution happened. And when it happens, I think Tahrir. I mean, today Tahrir is gone, right? There is no Tahrir. We can't have another Tahrir. We get infiltrated by the state security, who create up fights, and it's very hard to maintain that kind of dynamic. But Tahrir lives on as the idea, and that possibility that we experienced and lived and understood that we can continue living in by making these institutions not just one experience here, one experience there, but that we were many. And I mean, Tahrir, essentially, why it was a possibility, because one, it was a self-organized society. You know, there was no state, and we proved to ourselves that for 18 days we could stand there and live together and invent ways to, you know, overcome our differences and overcome our problems with, you know, what do we do with thieves when we catch them in the square? These are real things, you know. We could send them back to the police. No, we can't send them back to the police because we're fighting the police, in fact. But what do we do with them? We have to come up with an alternative, you know. We torture them. Some people were torturing them. And like, no, now this is not the society we want. This is not the values we want. And so we had to negotiate and negotiate until you reach the conclusion that, okay, if we will have somebody that will be caught, they will at least have one lawyer representative in a tent and questioned, and then the underground station was turned into a prison, our locally made prison, where the thieves were kept until we knew, you know, what the final decision was going to be. So it's coming up with small things, and you feel it so much in Tahrir. I always bring that example. Because it reminds me so much. Every time I forget, even, you know, we forget that this ever happened, you know, in the hopeless situation we were in, and that people were queuing for the loo. And of course, Egypt. If anybody's ever visited Egypt, we never queue for anything. I mean, in a sense, it is the politics says that whoever is stronger gets in first. You know, that's how injustice is on an everyday basis. But in Tahrir, we were queuing in the loo that was actually a mosque turned into a loo. And to my surprise, I remember standing there, and there was somebody regulating the goings in and out, and he was saying, you had to say whether you were going for a piss or a poo. I kid you not. And the man standing there used to say, 2 piss, 3 poo, please get your belts off before you go in and out so we save time. And for me, this is the revolution. It is. This is how I remember the revolution. It is at the moment where we decided to queue even for something that stupid like the loo, and to want to make this life really work. It is also about so many other things, about being a non-hierarchical movement that really, in essence, takes as a core that we do not want to reproduce these structures of power again, in any sensitive way possible. And so although Tahrir has disappeared, and although we're left with a hopeless case, and although I think half of us are starting to be on antidepressants and don't understand how the hell, after 1,000 people dying, we still have this military up there, and a right-wing parliament there, and in elections that is meant to be fraud. But what we cannot forget is that these very small openings that were happening there kind of led the way. And of course, there were a lot of sacrifices, because I completely don't like this talk of, you know, the activists did it or the workers did it. There were people who also burned police stations, sacrificed their lives, and it was because of that also violence and that was needed that we got this revolution. But at the end, what happened is, like, this revolution happened to confirm to us that it is possible. And what we continue to do is build institutions that will make sure that the possibilities will become a reality. We will become many, we have become many. And the small things that started as one-off have become more. A union, an alternative union, one independent union sprung up in 2007. Now we have a federation of independent unions with thousands and thousands. You had workers who were fighting, and from 2005, today they actually occupy the workplaces, put managers, you know, I don't have the English word for it, kidnap managers? in a good sense of the word. Take them off and say, we are not leaving until you give us our pay. They sleep under the cars, they stop rail stations. This is what the revolution is. We might have not gained big gains. We might have not really transformed the capitalist society, but we've created associations and are still creating associations that reflect this alternative. And in a sense, what I blame maybe us, or I can't blame us, and we were under a dictator. But had we maybe had more of these institutions from before, the insurrection or the revolution might have been even more successful, because we would have the structures on which we make these possibilities even more real. And I think you have an amazing opportunity here. You have the opportunity that this is happening, you know, and you never know when an insurrection happens. The one thing that will change it from just being just another liberal democracy or just another, you know, system that reproduces itself is really these organizations that we are creating here. And I mean, some other places have had to pay the price. Syria, for example, have these institutions because the revolution has lasted long and they've had the time to, you know, build local councils and build cooperatives because the violence was so strong. As I think, if anything, for us to learn here is what we're doing is so crucial. It is, I mean, we are not, you know, waiting for the possibility, we are creating the possibility, and we are the possibility, and we are many, and we are really the 99%. So yes, something to say, so something to end on is that what we're making here is actually part of the revolution, and if Occupy has stayed for 15 days and is gone, it's not gone, of course it's not gone. It has opened up a space and has given us a new language, and it will spring up somewhere else. And if today we just go home and feel like, okay, that was just another conference, you know, what have we done? Well, no, we are doing something. We are actually building the alternative. So, yeah, thank you to all, and we keep going.